Namaskar. Introduction to Epics, Puranas and Bhagavad Gita. Today's session, I welcome all the learners, listeners and viewers to this session, which is an ongoing part of SIAM course, Ethics, Theories and Applications. I have already introduced myself in the first two presentations. I am Nandini Sinha Kapoor, a professor for those who missed it out. A professor with the School of Interdisciplinary Transmission Study, where IGNOU has housed a discipline of philosophy. What are the objectives of this unit? It attempts to give a general outlook of the popular scriptures of Indian tradition, namely the epics, Puranas and the Gita. Although we have touched upon all these in the first two presentations on ethics in the history of Indian philosophy, but today we intend to do a bit more in details. The popularity of them is due to their narrative style with illustrations, mythological stories and dialogical forms. They do contain high philosophical notions, but given in a popular language. Emotional attachment and devotion towards personal deities and God are the general outcome of this sort of literature. Let's come to introduction. In Sanskrit tradition, scriptures are divided into two types: revealed texts, that is Shrutis. I already introduced the term Shruti in my last presentation, that is having listened to what is heard, and Shrutis are the Vedas. The remembered, and the other category is the remembered text or Smriti. What is remembered? The four Vedas, the Rig, Yajur, Sam and Atharvaveda, and 118 Upanishads come under the Shruti category. Whereas Bhagavad Gita, 18 Puranas, Shastras, Tantras, Agamas and many others come under Smriti category. Smriti literally means recollection of memory. It is a secondary authority. It derives its authority from the Shruti. Its object is to expand and exemplify the principles of Shruti or the Vedas. The Smriti consists of Gita, Brahma Sutra, Itihas, that is the epics, Puranas, chronicles and legends, Shastras, codes of law, Agamas and Tantras. The distinction between Shruti and Smriti is important for the two following reasons. Firstly, in case of conflicting views, Shruti's views will hold good. Secondly, without requiring any change in the Shruti, the Smritis preserve the authority admitting changes in it. What are the Agamas? Agamas are that which has been handed down as a tradition. These are the scriptures dealing with the worship of a particular aspect of God. They prescribe detailed courses of discipline for the worshipper. Each Agama consists of 4 sections. They are philosophy, mental discipline, rules for the construction of temples and images and religious practices. The Agamas are divided into 3 according to the deity what is worshipped. Vaishnava Agamas meant for the worship of Vishnu, also known as Pancharatra, or Vaikhanasa Agamas for Vishnu, Shaiva Agamas for Shiva and Sakta Agamas for Shakti. What are the Shastras or Dharma Shastras? These are codified laws regulating the society from time to time. The important lawgivers are Manu, Yagnavalkya and Parasar. We are already familiar with the famous Manusmriti. Their codes of law are known as Shastras, Dharma Shastra, and constitute another very important source of Indian ethics and philosophy, in which the detailed rules of conduct and practical moral instructions are given. Manusmriti. According to Manu, by the following of dharma, one attains perfection. Manu prescribes duties for all the 4 stages of life. What are the 4 stages? Brahmacharin, Garhastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyasin. And 4 different categories of persons in the society, namely the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. This book of Manu comprises the laws of Manu, which has become Aryan laws. Manu is considered to be great lawgiver in Vedic period. The code of conduct has 3 divisions: rituals, discharge of social responsibility and atonement of sins. They contain prescriptions and proscriptions. Let us come to Itihasas or the epics, the Ramayana Mahabharata. The 2 well-known and popular epics from Sanskrit tradition are the Ramayana by Valmiki and Mahabharata by Vyasa. Though the Ramayana and Mahabharata are the 2 epics which have influenced literature for several centuries in all parts of India. We have other famous regional Mahabharatas like Krittiba, or the Ramayana rather, like Krittivasa's Ramayana from Bengal and Kampan's Ramayana from Tamil Nadu. The Ramayana accepts the principles of Sanatana Dharma and duties of ruler in particular. The aim of the epics is to drive home to all the laws of the Smritis and principles of the Shruti by means of the exploits of their great national heroes Rama and Krishna. The Ramayana is the account of the deeds of a divinely great hero who set an example for the entire human race. It deals with the ideal conditions of humanness, a sense of brotherhood, obedience to moral law, firmness of character, honesty, sacrifice, and unbounded goodness. Mahabharata has a more profound theme which involves history, mythology, ethics, and metaphysics. It is the history of the Bharatas, a royal family of northern India, which divided into two parties, Pandavas and Kauravas. So it is almost like an encyclopedia of Hindu Dharma. The epics are essentially different from the early Vedic literature. They arose not among the priestly classes but among traditional birds called the Sutas. These also served as charioteers who witnessed the actual battle scenes and described them at first in their ballads. They are martial poetry concerned not with the praise of deities but of kings and nobles, not connected with the details of sacrifices but with events like wars, and imbued not with higher philosophical motives but with the practical purposes of gaining some reward from the audience before whom they were recited. We do not have them in their original and untempered form. They are added to by different hands at different periods. The nucleus, many pieces of ancient Vedic poetry containing legends, connected or unconnected with the life of epic heroes, of sacred poetry dealing with numerous myths and legends of Brahmanical origin. The three-dimensional view of Mahabharata on mundane plane, the story deals with the realistic account of a fierce war, Mahabharata, or annihilation, with its interest centered on the epic characters. The meaning of the ethical plan views the war as conflict between principles of dharma and adharma, between good and evil, between justice and injustice, in which contending parties are regarded as incarnations of devas and asuras, and the war ends in the victory of dharma. On the ethico-psychological plane, the epic aims at impressing upon the reader the paramount moral values. On the transcendental plane, which takes us beyond dharma and adharma, the war is fought not only in the Kurukshetra but also in our own minds. This perpetual battle between the higher self and the lower self of man for establishing mastery over body is symbolized by fight between the cousins for sovereignty. It will serve our purpose if we concentrate on philosophical component of Mahabharata. We can trace two philosophical issues in this work. One is expounded in Bhagavad Gita, rather in a very unsatisfactory manner because it is mainly a work in theistic tradition. Second one is the morality and polity expounded by two prominent characters, Vidura and Bhishma. But these philosophical issues in this work suffer from a serious drawback from philosophical point of view. Ethical insights of epics. From the point of view of ethics, it is desirable to regard some characters as personification of virtue. Vidura and Bhishma belong to this category. In contrast to these characters in the Mahabharata, we have other characters which are regarded as personification of evil. Why should any epic portray evil characters? This is one question. Are they in a broader perspective really evil forces? This is another question. The second question is much deeper philosophically and cannot be answered easily. First one is slightly easier to handle. An epic must be vast, hence it is ought to include all facts of world and all aspects of life. So evil characters ought to find place in any epic worth their name. Vidura's exposition of moral principles begins with a clear distinction between the shreyas, meaning desirable, and prayers pleasing. It is immediately followed by a second analogy to demonstrate the status of pleasure, which is invariably accompanied by evil. To make this concomitant relation explicit, Vidura compares pleasure with honey, pleasure seeker with the one who collects honey, and evil with abyss, and says that the pleasure hunter is busy only in seeking honey, unmindful of impending danger of falling into the abyss. In the Mahabharata, Vidura plays his role on three occasions. On the second occasion, Vidura plays the role of a counselor. His counseling has moral base. He makes an explicit distinction between the two states of mind, those of wise man and ignorant. While Plato speaks of 4 cardinal virtues, Vidura speaks of 6 cardinal vices. Greed is one of them. He makes out a case for wise man by listing the remaining vices: lust, anger, irrational attachment, arrogance, and jealousy, which he does not possess. Now let's come to political thoughts in epics. Bhishma's advice in Dharmaraya specifies only the duties and responsibilities of ruler with no mention of duties of citizen. Against the backdrop, it becomes obvious that in real sense, citizen is the king and the ruler is his guardian. Bhishma's lecture not only explicitly mentioned king's qualities and duties, but also it is the first ever treatise on public administration. King should be proactive, truthful and straightforward. According to Bhishma, these are the most important qualities of king. He should be compassionate but not too soft. The essence of Raja Dharma is safeguarding the interest of citizen. In fact, Bhishma lists 36 qualities in an ideal king which are necessary to follow Raja Dharma, without which the citizens do not receive protection from the king. Foreign policy is another aspect of public administration. Foreign policy involves two forces, the enemies and friends. The role of friends is not much highlighted, but the emphasis that the king should know how to deal with enemy. Prudence is always the guiding force. Bhishma makes it very clear that the war is not the solution, nor did he mean that enemy can be spared. Constant vigil, concealing one's own weakness, and proper judgment only can ensure safety and security. All these descriptions apply under normal circumstances, whereas in distress, even enemies should enjoy compassion, because a humanitarian treatment may destroy enmity. Ultimately, human outlook scores over other considerations. Now come to 18 Puranas. Purana is a story of the old days. Purana means old and is more than a myth. It is a record of stories of antiquity, having no parallel in Western literature. These are meant for celebration of religion, the glorification of saints and kings, and the edification of readers, whose faith is to be strengthened. They are prolix, prolix, flowery, repetitive, derivative from the earlier models, with a good deal of borrowing and the conflation, and lacking even the slender thread of history. Although we cannot date Puranas by its character of repeating the stories of the old days, one can trace their composition from 300 AD to 1000 AD. They speak of ascendancy of this or that main god in evolving pantheon. They tend to dedicate to that god around whom the old stories are retold. Puranas is devotional material from the Bhakti tradition. The stories about the gods who are the objects of people's loyalty and practices of various kinds appropriate to the worship of these gods. These consist of chronicles and legends and genealogy of kings. They are treatises of history, cosmology, with various symbolical illustrations of philosophical principles and so forth. According to tradition, there are 18 Puranas. These are the scriptures dealing with the worship of a particular aspect of God. They prescribe detailed courses of discipline of the worshipper, which each agama consists of 4 sections. They are philosophy, mental discipline, rules for the construction of temples and images, and religious practices. Agamas are divided into 3 according to the deity that is worshipped. We have already mentioned, we repeat again, the Vaishnava Agamas, also known as Pancharatra and Vaikhanasa for Vishnu, Shaiva Agamas for Shiva, and the Shakta Agamas or Tantras for Shakti. Each glorifies its particular deity. People's response to their gods is in terms of religious practices of bhakti, prayers, ceremonial hymns, gifts given to Brahmin and gods, vows to service, shraddhas or ritual practices, and tirthas. The doctrine of avatar or divine incarnation is fully developed in the epics and Puranas. The purpose of the avatar is for the protection of the virtuous and for the destruction of the wicked and for the establishment of dharma or moral order. According to the Puranas, there are 10 avatars of Vishnu: Matsya the fish, Kurma the tortoise, Baraha the boar, Narasimha the man lion, Vamana the dwarf, Parashurama, Rama with the axe, Ramachandra, hero of the Ramayana, Krishna, the god of Bhagavad Gita, Balarama, the warrior Rama, and Kalki, the hero on a white horse, who is to come at the end of Kali Yuga. The gods are stratified, for there appear both Vedic and post-Vedic deities together. Of the Vedic gods, Indra, Agni, Soma, Vayu and Surya reappear in Puranic lore, but they are no longer central as they used to be central in the Vedic ritual, and some of their functions have also changed by the Puranic time. By the way, historically, the Puranic times are supposed to be beginning of the Gupta period, so 4th century AD onwards, and it continues to the later centuries of early medieval period up to 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. It is as if they have been demoted, those Vedic deities, they have been demoted in favor of the famous Hindu triad of Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver and Shiva the destroyer, who dominate Puranic literature. Each of the three has a goddess as consort. Brahma's wife is Saraswati, patroness of music and learning. Vishnu's wife is Lakshmi, goddess of fortune, sometimes beneficent and sometimes not. And Shiva's wife is Parvati, the daughter of the Himalayan mountain. Here is a notable exception. Not always the Devis or Shakti is a spouse or wife. Notable exception is found in Devi Mahatmya section of the Markandeya Puran, in which the ferocious Durga and the black Kali created spouseless out of the combined energy of the gods. So they are women goddesses, they are goddesses on their own right without being wife of so and so. They become manifest to do combat with the demons. They are the instruments of popular education. Dharma or social duty reflects the same Hindu law codes, basically Brahmanical, and is given to illustrative stories and in lecture form. The Puranas afford us far greater insight into all aspects of phases of Hinduism. Its mythology, the idol worship, its theism and pantheism, its love of God, its philosophy and its superstitions, its festivals and ceremonies, its ethics, than any other works. So here are some of the references which have been listed for you on the Puranic studies. Purana word has two slightly differing etymological meanings. Pura meaning the past, Atitam lost, Anagatam about to happen is one meaning. Pura past, Bhabam happened is another. Thus it happened. In terms of structure, Purana consists of 5 components. They are description of nation or nations and their history, history of creation, history of recreation, description of dynasties, and story of each Manu or Manvantara. Now let's come to Bhagavad Gita. In Sanskrit tradition, there are many Gita literature. One that got popularity as it is attributed to Krishna and form part of famous Mahabharata is Bhagavad Gita. The term Bhagavata means Lord, Gita means song. And so the meaning of Bhagavad Gita is literary song of the Lord. This is the literature written in the poetic form that must have been compiled around 200 BC before Christ. In the battle of Kurukshetra, Lord Krishna urges Arjuna to do his duty, good or evil, without any attachment for the fruit of actions, nishkama karma. Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachan. I had mentioned it in the earlier presentation that you have all the right to necessary action, to do your duty, but you have no right to its outcome or to the result of your duty or for your action. Gita is short, beautifully harmonizes, in short, the philosophy of action, devotion and knowledge. That is, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, devotion and knowledge, jnana yoga. 3 gunas, sattva, principle of light, rajas, source of activity, tamas, responsible to resist the actions, are explained well. There are 2 possible approaches to the Gita. One is regarding it as a sacred text in conformity with tradition. Secondly, regarding it as a philosophical text. 3 features are prominent in Gita: knowledge, social obligation and devotion. The confluence of these principal features constitute what is popularly known as yoga. There is no need to consider its role in life, which the Gita has explained. What is important is its position in philosophy. But there is no reference to its philosophical foundation anywhere in the Gita. For example, consider devotion or bhakti. Devotion is sensible only when bhakta is distinct from Paramatma, not otherwise. In other words, the refutation of Advaita. What is Advaita? That is, you and me are part of the God. There is no duality but only one, essentially one reality. The God and you are the same. So, in other words, the refutation of the Advaita is a prerequisite to accept the relevance of bhakti. So, when there is a bhakti, Paramatma is separate from you. But nowhere do we find any reference to Dvaita or Advaita in this work. On the contrary, Gita concludes by merging obligation or karma and knowledge in bhakti. Bhakti is the most important aspect of Bhagavad Gita. Now let's come to idea of God in Gita. In Gita, God is more personal. He is identified with Krishna Avatara. He is named as Purushottama. Purushottama means one who is a supreme being and intelligent with the mystical mind. He becomes a ground for mutable and immutable aspects of the universe. That is, he is Purushottama in whom the whole world is grounded. Everything works by his divine intelligence and he is the creator of everything. He is the ultimate cause principle of everything and has power of everything. And so, he is both transcendent and immanent. Wherever dharma is on decline, the Supreme Being, Purushottama, embodies himself to protect the upright and punish the wicked and to establish dharma. Though he is unborn and imperishable Lord of beings, yet comes into the world in his own images to maintain the dharma in the universe. The concept of avatara is prevalent even from the time of the Vedas. Upanishads speak of Amshavatara, partial manifestation of God, or avatar is full conscious descent of God, yet into phenomenal world, accepting the conditions of becoming. Wherever dharma is on the decline, the Supreme Being Purushottama embodies himself to protect the upright and to punish the wicked and to establish dharma. So he comes in his avatara form to this earth. Though he is unborn and imperishable Lord of beings, yet comes into the world in his own images to maintain dharma in the universe. Thus what we find in Gita, God is of love and grace who evokes faith, love and devotion. Three margas in Gita: karma, jnana, bhakti are the three paths proposed as spiritual disciplines by Gita for the betterment of one's wealth. Karma Yoga, according to Gita, every individual is expected to be karma yogin, ethically and intellectually virtuous. A karma yogi is the one in whom there is an absence of pride, conceit, vanity, egoism and presence of forgiveness, sincerity, purity, steadfastness, self-control, renunciation, strong devotion to the Lord, reverence to the Master and love for the scriptures. So, if one does his duty, by his very duty he becomes karma yogi or nishkama karma. Jnana yoga, one should be a jnana yogi also. Jnana of Brahman or Purushottama refers to his wisdom, and so for the jnana yogi this jnana is an essential quality for his liberation. Bhakti Yoga, it insists on devotion. In this devotion, a devotee should be a sincere and continuous seeker of truth. One point becomes clear from the Gita. No one can attain moksha if he or she renounces the world. Renouncing the world is tantamount to renouncing obligations. Hence, in defense of the Gita, one assertion can be unhesitatingly made that the Gita does not prioritize spirituality at the expense of worldly life. So, the worldly life is much more important than the spiritual life in Bhagavad Gita. Gita does not prioritize spirituality at the expense of worldly life. So, all the teachings of Lord Krishna are mainly meant for this life, not for life after death. That we should remember. While jnana stands for realization of the highest level, karma assumes a very different meaning. During the Vedic age, karma meant only performing yagna, but in the Gita it has come to mean social obligation. Yoga came to be understood as dedication. Hence, karma yoga may be understood as discharging duty with a sense of commitment. The most important element in the Gita is the doctrine of Nishkama Karma, that is, which consists in discharging obligations in an impersonal manner. Again, I repeat that famous shloka, Karmanyavadika raste ma phaleshu kadachan. We have right to our karma, to our duty, to our necessary action, but not to its outcome or result or prize or anything out of it. This attitude literally debars the yagnas, especially one performs the yagnas with selfish motive. The Gita, however, never advocated that karma should be renounced. So, Gita mainly emphasizes that you should have bhakti gyan and jnana yoga, but you should also perform your karmas. Karmas are important for this life to continue on this earth. Now, the term bhakti is defined as devotion or passionate love for the divine. Moksha or liberation from rebirth was not in the following of rules, regulations or societal ordering, but it was through simple devotion to the divine. Within the movement of large useful distinctions have been made by contemporary scholars between those poet saints and composed verses extolling God with attributes or form, namely Saguna Bhakti, and those extolling God without beyond all attributes or form, Nirguna Bhakti. So, the God with attributes, Saguna Bhakti, God without any qualities or attributes is Nirguna Bhakti. While the differences between these two branches are indeed important, their overarching similarities cannot be minimized. Both focused on singular devotion, mystical love for God, and had a particular focus on a personal relationship with the divine. A clearer expression of bhakti began to be formed during the epic and the Puranic period. I have already mentioned the Puranic and the epic period. We mostly take it as from the Gupta period, 4th century AD onwards for another 600-700 years. Texts such as Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavata Purana clearly explore bhakti yoga or the path of devotion as means to salvation. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna preached the message of devotion to a personal God. Bhakti is a very important topic found in the scriptures and with various shades of meaning in different contexts. The word bhakti is used in scriptures in two different meanings. Bhakti means devotion towards God. Devotion is love directed towards a higher principle. And reverential love can be defined as devotion. We talk about Matri Bhakti and Pitri Bhakti. In our tradition, we look upon parents as objects of worship. Similarly, we talk about Guru Bhakti, Desha Bhakti and Ishvara Bhakti. Therefore, in general, bhakti is love towards a higher principle, especially love towards God. Three forms of love are means, love, end love and self-love. Scriptures point out that all forms of love that a human being entertains are directed towards only three things. The first one is love of the goal, wanting to achieve some, and secondly, it is because we love them that we want to acquire them. Since the means are useful to accomplish the ends, we love the means as well. The third object of love is oneself. Everyone loves himself or herself. Three grades of devotion. Scriptures point out that the intensity of love depends upon how you look upon God, because different people see God in different ways. The way you look upon God will determine the intensity of love. Majority of people look upon God only as means for various worldly ends. As long as you look upon God as means, that love is called Manda Bhakti. The second is where the goal of the life you want to love the God. They know God represents security, God represents peace, God represents happiness. They know that everyone is seeing security, peace and happiness alone. Naturally, their love of God as an end, and therefore it is more intense than the previous one. Therefore, this bhakti is Madhyama, Mandava Bhakti and Madhyama Bhakti. The Uttama Bhakti is a selfless love to God where you love yourself. God is the dearest, and Krishna beautifully elaborates this in the 7th and the 12th chapters of the Gita. Now finally, we sum up. Human society checks with his conclusions and definitions of reality in the time of contemporary issues and questions. When encountered with irrelevant answers from the previous conception, they try for new answers for the new questions or even for the same old questions. In our present endeavor, we understand that the thoughts of people of that time are ancient. However, let us remember that the Puranic knowledge is not really antiquated. That is why they continue to be relevant till today. The Puranas, Itihasas and Gita finally emphasize on the necessity of ethics and advocate, deep contemplation on moral virtues and self-control. It deals with cosmic and moral order, maintaining peace, harmony and order in society and cosmos. Thank you so much for your patient hearing, learners and listeners and viewers. Namaskar.